The history of modernity's origins is filled with myths and legends that historians have long since debunked. However, these myths still make up the bulk of what is taught in schools, promoted in the media, and perpetuated by the entertainment industry. Such is the deep infiltration of these fallacies in the collective mind, even among professional scientists with little to no historical knowledge, that any attempt to update the public on the current state of historical research regarding that period is met with apoplectic attacks and accusations of a malicious attempt to discredit science in favor of some religious fundamentalism. The fact that these reactions are themselves the epitome of fundamentalism is so glaringly obvious that it requires no further proof. The belief in science as the source of all authority has become an unshakable dogma, even among those who have been soaked in deconstructionism at university and have every reason to abandon such a notion entirely. But it's not about actual science, whether it be the experimental method or the systematic search for knowledge. Instead, what we're dealing with is an agglutinative symbol meant to instill a sense of identity and self-assurance in social groups engaged in spreading the ideology of militant anti-Christianism. From such groups, one can hardly expect any semblance of rationality. Rather, we're bound to see shameless use of pejorative labels and, in extreme cases, even calls for police intervention. One of the myths still clung to is that the rise of modern science replaced pure syllogistic reasoning with the inductive method. Joseph de Maistre thoroughly demonstrated the absurdity of this claim in his posthumous work Examen de la Philosophie de Bacon, 1836. But no one paid much attention to him because de Maistre was a peculiar figure who managed to offend Masons and progressives by being a devout Catholic, and Catholics by being a Freemason. David Hume, without delving into the historical question, had already dismantled the pretensions of induction. But since he proposed nothing to replace it, he was received with pious diversions by those who felt utterly naked and destitute without it. It wasn't until the 20th century that, together, the faith in induction and the efforts to make it the hallmark of modern science were finally laid to rest in Sir Karl Popper's seminal work, The Logic of Scientific Discovery, 1934, where he demonstrated that induction is worthless without a preceding syllogistic reasoning to underpin it. Thus, the method of science was, at its core, still the good old analytical syllogism of Aristotle. But popular belief in this myth remains alive and well, and not only proves difficult to kill, but also feeds and sustains, by contagion, other similar myths, which sometimes transcend the boundaries of mass culture and permeate the higher spheres of thought. In his study on Bacon in On Modern Origins, Essays in Early Modern Philosophy, Lexington Books, 2004, Richard Kennington fails in his usual competence when he writes this monstrosity. Pre-modern philosophy and science did not produce any significant technology. On the contrary, the leading figures of 17th century rationalism, Bacon, Descartes, Hobbes, and Locke, were unanimous in declaring that the aim was to dominate nature and therefore create an infinity of devices, to use Descartes' expression, that would alleviate the human condition. Certainly, one can say that reason, in its post-Cartesian formulation, fulfilled its promise. The choice of these pioneers of technology couldn't be worse. John Locke made no discoveries in the physical sciences. Hobbes concocted a series of false theories that are only useful for the comedic community. And Bacon, about whom the same can be said, demonstrated complete ignorance and misunderstanding of the science existing in his own time, which he spoke of with the characteristic disdain of a presumptuous ignoramus. Thomas Bodley, the founder of the famous Bodleian Library at Oxford, wrote to him about it. "I cannot comprehend your complaints. Never has there been more fervor for science than in our days. You criticize men for neglecting experiments, yet experiments are being conducted across the entire globe. Out of the four, only Descartes contributed something to the progress of technology, especially with the creation of analytic geometry. But in the strict field of mathematics, it cannot be said that he spectacularly surpassed his predecessors, Viet, Kepler, Galileo, Tycho Brahe, and so many others. It is also somewhat ridiculous to depreciate pre-modern technology in the face of the prodigious achievements of Gothic architecture, or the fact that even today, the science of ancient Egypt continues to baffle and bewilder researchers. More inexplicable still is that the entire theoretical foundation of modern capitalist economics was already in place among the scholastics, allegedly the worst enemies of modernity, 2 centuries before Adam Smith scratched the surface of these notions. The cause and effect relationship between rationalist philosophy and technological progress seems increasingly elusive and persists more as a propaganda slogan than as historical reality. The most curious, if not downright pathological, thing is that this slogan is brandished as a weapon even by the most fierce anti-rationalists, such as the disciples of Nietzsche, Paul Feyerabend, or Jacques Derrida. They've buried modernity, but continue to invoke its ghost to frighten Christians.